All right, welcome. Full Stack Web 14. Another beautiful day of programming. Preprocessing 2. Preprocessing is super deep. I mean, we could go a whole week if we wanted to, but we don't need to because by the end of today, you will have been at least exposed to some of the bigger ideas inside of preprocessing, and you can take it further if you want. That's your prerogative. But for me, and what I need to teach you today, we're going to be talking about more about mixins, like how we can make even more crazy awesome stuff with mixins. We're going to be talking about escaping strings out and what that looks like. We're going to be talking about probably look at namespaces. They're pretty fun. We're going to look at importing and what that does for us in a bigger project. And that should be really fun. And we'll also talk about how we can use escaping with media queries to do way more efficient media queries. So we're going to push ourselves even further, whether you knew it or not. That's what we're going to be doing today. You probably feel pretty stretched right now. Some of you that are newer to CSS and preprocessing is like, wow, but we're going to push ourselves a little bit even further. Thursdays are usually a little bit more chill on the instruction because you've been hit really hard with 3 days of heavy instruction. Thursdays, I like to give you a little time to think about all of the week in preparation for your sprint challenge. I can tell you with confidence that if you can do today's assignment, you can do the sprint challenge. So today's assignment is basically mirrored with some tweaks on the sprint challenge for tomorrow. So I get excited about today's assignment. You'll get a preview of what to expect tomorrow. All right, before we get even further though, I would love to see some of your resumes that you built yesterday. So give me your GitHub link inside of this thread here. So I'm going to make a thread called Show Me Your Pre-Processing 1 Projects. Remember, in the thread. In the thread. All right. Okay, got his in there. So what you can do, by the way, if you've not seen this, you can type in HTML preview. And I'll give you this link if you haven't seen it yet. It's pretty cool. This allows me to preview your link, but you can actually do it for me before I get it. So you can pop in your HTML file, throw it inside this preview, hit go, and then give me this URL. That's pretty cool. All right, okay, so what do we got here? Senior designer, Gizinari, I'm not going to try to say that, games. Very cool. This is exactly what I was looking for. So there's your navigation, intro, bio, like why I should hire you, skills and hobbies. This is awesome. Perfect. Now, just a little design tip and trick. When text is so close to itself, like it's right on top of each other, we can use line height to give that some separation. So if we inspect this element on this P tag, I can actually come in here and introduce some line height and do like 1.25 or even 1.5. You see how that expands out? That is so much easier to read for humans. So this is a good tip and trick to use line height. Oh, sorry, my inspector is out of my window. Sorry, there you go. So I just popped a little line height in there just to show you that you can do a lot of good things by giving yourself enough space to breathe, because we just can't consume stuff that is so smashed together. So I know some of you are looking for some design help here and there, so I'm going to proffer it whether you like it or not, because I think it's valuable for you to know these things. Yeah, work history here was really good. I like that a lot. Very cool. Delusion of grandeur. Okay, see what you got, Ed. So, okay, come in here, grab the HTML. Sorry, I should have taught you guys about this first so we can speed this up, get as many as we can. It's timely. Now, oh, wow, here we go. All around internet guy. I like that. This is really good. Nice. You were the CTO of Google and the executive chef at McDonald's. Presently, how do you do that, Ed, and still come to Atlanta school? That's awesome. Very good. Let's see what this looks like on mobile. Uh-oh. Some things work, some things don't. Got that horizontal. Well, you know what? HTML GitHub Preview will jack things up, so I won't take that into account. But I can see that you've got some percent stuff going on there. The HTML Preview does mess things up quite a bit. Very good, Ed. Okay, Sabrina. Oh, wow, this is cool looking. Did you do that signature yourself? I like that. Oh, man, this is like super nice. Very cool. Marketing director for 5 years at this place. Did some freelancing for a while. Check out my work here. Skills. This is cool. Very cool. Very fresh looking. I like that, Sabrina. Thank you for sharing. Adam. Clark Kent. Okay, here we go. We've got a fictitious one. Bad experience contact. This is cool. I like the strike through that you use. That's cool use of strike through. Very cool. Totally not Superman. Please hire me. All right, let's see if you got mobile in here. Oh, look at that mobile. Okay. Color me impressed. Very well done. Very good. I didn't check yours, Sabrina. Nice. I actually love that Sabrina removed the image to make mobile an easier experience for the user. Very smart of you. Man, I did not teach you guys this. I'm impressed that you're taking this to another level. Okay, let me scroll down and get middle of the pack here. Let's go with Katie. Charlie Kelly, JD, Birdlaw. Very cool. I love that I can see you're totally messing around with layout here and trying some new things. This is super cool. Let's see if we got a mobile. Nice, good stacking. Very well played. I will warn you against white on yellow. It's very hard to see. But everything else, the contrast is nice. Very good. All right. Man, I just want to click all of these. This is awesome. Carlos. See what you got here. And we'll do one more after this. Uh-oh, broken image, probably because of the GitHub thing. Waluigi, a good worker, professional villain. I like this. I do evil stuff. If you're into evil stuff as well, please feel free to connect with me. That's awesome. This is really cool. Let's see. So you use an interesting indie flower. Cool font. Looks like handwriting. Really good handwriting. That's awesome. Man, good job, everybody. Okay, one more. Random click goes to Katie Fitzpatrick. Oh, wow. Katie put in work on this. Work, kudos, blog. That's a cool logo. I really like that logo. I'm assuming you had it before. That's really cool. Key skill sets. Ooh, the navigation on the bottom and the top. Very smart of you. Man, I think this might be the best group of resumes I've ever seen out of a cohort. Well done, everyone. Jeez. If I didn't show yours, don't be sad. Thank you for posting it. There's just so many. But my gosh, you guys. I am totally impressed. Totally impressed. And those of you that used the design file, I'm not unimpressed. That design file is not easy to build. So thank you for trying that design file as well. I just wanted to give you some creative freedom. I wanted you to be able to say, what can I do with my skills? And clearly, you did amazing things. So good job, everybody. Wow, I'm just so impressed. I don't just say that. Like, I gain nothing in giving you false praise. That is legitimately impressive. Okay. One thing I wanted to talk about with you with some light design is this website I use to get inspiration from. So it's called AWWW so awards.com. And this website will crowdsource awards, and people will say, okay, based on these 4 criteria, design, usability, creativity, and content, let's rate these things and see what websites are really good. And so you can look at nominees, winners. I tend to look at the winners in different categories. So let's say we went to well, this is actually technology, sorry. Let's go to categories. So if you were looking at doing like a website in sports, for example, we could come in here and get some inspiration. And I love just looking at these thumbnails. And then if something really catches my eye, and I'm like, ooh, I really want to build that kind of layout. I want you to pay attention though, because like this right here, this has got, some heavy imagery going on. And so avoid these kind of things as places you're looking first. You want to look at layout heavy things as you start messing around with your CSS skills. So, I mean, the reason that this stuff looks so cool is because there's a cool imagery, right? Like right here, there's this really crazy image and that makes it look fun. I don't expect you to go that far, but I do expect you to look at stuff like this. This is interesting. So they're placing their text in a certain spot, juxtaposed against the navigation at the top. And of course, they have a nice image as well, but I feel like you could swap this out to a solid color and it would still look good. And so those are the kind of things that I'm looking for. I'm looking for stuff that really inspires me, and I'm like, man, I really wish I could do this. And then once I find it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go try and see if I can do this. So that's how I push my skills forward. I use this website. I look at the best of the best, and I go, this stuff was actually coded, Because if you look at a design file that's not actually coded, it's not the same thing, because getting that thing coded is a beast. So if I can see final coded things, I can actually inspect element. I can see what they actually did, right? So anyway, this is hopefully provides you some inspiration for your design pursuits. It helps me a lot when I'm trying to think about ideas as well. Okay. So let's go back. I've got pre-processing too. I've just got some basic HTML that we've been playing with, and we'll continue to play with that. So here's the link for today. All right. So let's just do some review. I always want to review everything we've done this whole week. On Thursday is a nice review day, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about the new concepts as well. It's all part of the plan. So let's review responsive web design very quickly. We learned about the difference between adaptive, responsive, fluid, and fixed. So remember, the difference between adaptive and responsive is what? What is the big difference between those two words, adaptive and responsive? What do you guys think? Percentages, adaptive versus multiple layouts. So Sam really nails it when he says percentages. That's, if you were to use one word, that's it. Ed goes further and says adaptive is a set breakpoint. Chance says adaptive has multiple layouts, which is basically breakpoints. So adaptive means it's kind of static until it's a breakpoint. Can anybody tell me, like, critically thinking, why you would do one or the other, like one over the other, now that you've had experience with them both? What do you guys think? Adam says audience. Chance says responsive is quicker to develop. Specific device, accessibility, user experience. These are all like really good words, and they're all right, actually. I think the biggest thing as a professional developer between them is when you're doing adaptive, you're not having to worry about every little space between the breakpoints. So if somebody comes to me and they say, I have a $4,000 budget, and I'm going, okay, with that budget, I can give you an adaptive website, but it's not going to look good between the different points that it adapts. But if you're willing to pay, $8,000, then I can make things really, really nice. I'm making up numbers here. But the concept is it can take time and a half or even double the time to make those responsive websites look really pretty. For example, remember the Goodline website that I always talk about? I use it a lot because it's really just got a lot of that problem that we solved, which was the percent-based layout. So this is what I mean. This is a cut above when it comes to making everything look good no matter what. I mean, that's really time-consuming to do compared to if we just went in and we just hit breakpoints and everything changed. So hopefully you're going, okay, adaptive is 100% breakpoints. Responsive, like fully responsive, is percents plus breakpoints. Okay, good review. Good thing to keep in our heads. We've learned about media queries. We've learned about the difference between desktop and mobile approach. So when someone says to you, I want a desktop or I want a mobile first experience, what does that start triggering in your head? Min width, that's very good. It makes me very happy to see you're saying min width. So min width is mobile first, that's right. Can someone explain to me, or many of you explain to me, in your own words, the difference between a min width and a max width and a breakpoint? Sabrina, the Goodline was not used grid, it was using floats. It was used floats. That was a beast. So no, the grid didn't exist back then. Okay, Chan says using max width, the site will change as the screen shrinks. Okay, I like that. Jordan says min width starts with a smaller PX and moves larger. Yes. Chan says design for desktop views. Chad says min width changes when the screen gets bigger. Good, very good. Okay, this is all I needed. Min width versus min width determine or which logic goes. I think you meant to say max width, Sam. You're good though. Blake says max width would go top, min width would go bottom. Min width starts without media queries. Ooh, I like that. So Troy says something interesting, and I want to make sure that we understand this. When we're using a mobile first, one concept that I need you guys to understand is that when you say mobile or desktop first, whichever one you decide is going to be your content here, right? So your CSS, whatever you write here, well, I guess I don't have my preprocessor on. I'll turn that on in a second, but mobile first is the base files or base styles, and desktop first would be the base style. So good thought there. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I'm impressed you guys are doing so well. Let's look at our pre-processing now. So within actually one more thing with responsive. Tell me about responsive units. What's the difference between a REM and an M? What is the difference between a REM unit and an M unit? So REM is based on root, which is based on the HTML. Very good. And M is based off of its parent or itself, by the way, which seems silly, but you could set a pixels technically in the spec. All right, very good. All right, now this is not a trick question. I've answered this many times. What is the unit of measure that you use in your job? Is it REM, M, PX? What is it? Ryan, you win. Ryan says whatever your boss says. That is right. I'm not even kidding. So I remember, guys, I'm trying to create critical thinkers here, not code monkeys. So as a critical thinker, you have to go, okay, I've got to live in a different environment. I've got to be prepared to code in M's exclusively if I need to be and be comfortable with that, even if you don't like it. Even if I told you that they're not efficient. boss man wins. Okay, good. Okay. So now we're moving into preprocessing. We've learned about preprocessors. We've learned that there's a language that we write in. And the language that we write in our case is going to be less. It's a syntax, a certain style of writing our code. We've learned about the documentation here in lesscss.org. We learned that we're using less because it's inside of our ecosystem of JavaScript, and that's why we're using it at Lambda School. But you should be able to jump into Sass, Stylus, or PostCSS in an instant, knowing this knowledge with less. In fact, let me prove it to you really quickly. So, well, that was yesterday's. Why is that up? Oh, I was grabbing the HTML. So over here, let's go to, remember that now that you guys have had the pain of a preprocessor build on your computer, you can appreciate how ridiculously easy this is now. So you come in here and you just hit the stupid less button and you got it. I mean, how good is that? That's super good. Okay, I'm going to put a reset in here because I want total control, but also why? Why are resets really good? Why are resets potentially a good decision? Cross-browser issues. Very good, Ryan. Very good, Frank. Okay, so notice right here, maybe you didn't notice yesterday, but there's a little less in parentheses. It's letting me know that I'm using less, right? So let's test this out. We learned about variables. So let's say my var, and we'll just make it a red because that's just so easy to do. And then we can come in here and we'll just grab our H1 and we'll say font size, and we'll do like 2 rem. And let's set it up to, let's keep being good. So we'll set up our root, remember, and font size, what is it? 62.5, very good. And then we're gonna grab our container, which is containing everything, and we'll set it up 1.6 rem to get us the equivalence of 1.6 pixels or 16 px. All right, so here's our H1. Let's give it some margin. Remember our shorthand with 2 pieces is top and bottom, left and right. So we'll give ourselves some space there, and then left and right. We'll just keep it all there. We'll just do all of it so we can see our digital agency. Okay, so now if we wanted to change the color of this, we learned yesterday that we can say my var and assign it to that color, and there it goes, red. Okay, I'm now going to turn this into pre-processing with a different language. We're going to use SCSS. Okay, so I'm going to hit save and close. Notice it's broken. It's not working, even though it looks like it is. It's saying this is not good, right? So the interesting thing is inside of Sass, SCSS, it's a $sign. And so if we introduce a $sign, guess what, everybody? It works. That's what I mean, that these things are almost identical. And if you use like nesting, it's the same thing. So if I did header and I nested an H1 inside of it, it's the same thing. It still works. So I'm not kidding to you when I'm not messing with you when I say that when you learn one, you've learned the other. It's just syntactical sugar. A $sign versus an @ symbol as far as variables go. There are some other nuances, but they're very small. So just rest assured, and notice how it says SCSS, that I'm not kidding when I say you've learned one, you've learned them all, conceptually. Okay, let's go back to our less. All right, let's talk about nested media queries. So inside this H1, let's say we wanted to change this H1's color at a certain media query, at a certain breakpoint, I should say. So we'll say @media, and then we have to say max width. My Siri heard me say Siri, I guess. That was weird. Okay, max width, and then we'll do 800 for our tablet view. And so inside of this, remember, this media query is inside the H1, so we don't have to rewrite our selector. And we could change this to say, okay, change the font size to 3M, or even 4rem, I should say. So there's our full screen. We get down to here, and then of course, let's introduce our phone. Now, if this is leading into a new concept, we're done with our review. And so let's make this a different color then, just so we can see some changes. All right, so now we get below 500, and there we are. So this was a little cumbersome yesterday, seeing all these, writing this out over and over. Hopefully you felt the pain of writing that over and over. That pain doesn't necessarily go away today, but we do make it a little bit easier with escaping. So one of the first concepts we're going to talk about that's new right now is called escaping. Escaping allows you to use any arbitrary string as a property or a value, a variable value. Anything inside, and notice there's this weird squiggly called a tilde. This tilde, and then there's a string, or anything with a single quote string, so you can use double or single quotes, is used as with no changes except interpolation. So that means we can't pop our full media query in there because it won't interpolate. So that sucks. I wish we could do it. So notice their code. At min 768, it contains this string at all times. So then look how nice that media query looks. At media, min 768. And it's really, really readable and reusable. So then that results in the bubbled media query on the outside. Pretty cool. Over here it says, note, as of less 3.5, you can simply write this. So in this case, it says at min 768. And you can actually just put in min width without the string escaping around it. But I would recommend not doing that for now because it's such a new feature. Older versions of less might not use it, but man, that's pretty cool. So let's go look at this in action. So I'm going to come up here. Remember, I want to put my variables at the top of my page. Why do I do that? Knowing they're lazy loaded, it doesn't really matter, but why am I doing that? Why do I put variables at the top of the page? For future devs, and so you can find them. Both are correct answers, but mostly for future developers. Okay, so I've got my variable up there. Let's make a new variable. So everybody, I'm going to hit save. I want you guys to write this with me. Fingers on keyboards. Let's do this. So take that link, go to line 2 with me, and do this with me. So I'm going to say at, and what we'll do is we'll say tablet. Okay. And then it's just a normal variable, so set up your variable first. And then we're going to use our tilde. We'll use our single quote strings here. And then, so remember what it looks like up here, right? You just throw in the media query that you want. So let's go try that out. Our media, well, let's put in max width because that's what we've already got down there. So max width 800px. All right. So now what I want to do is I want you guys to copy and paste this tablet down and replace this big chunk that we now have inside of our string, like that. Okay. Let's see. At tablet, tilde, max width. Oh yeah, I think I need the parentheses. Like, what did I miss here? There we go. Good catch. So in this case, now you can see that the escape string gives us the ability to have more than one value, basically. Because over here we have like red, right? But red wouldn't cut it if we were trying to do max width with parentheses. Like, these parentheses really are why we have to do this. And we've got multiple. We've got a key and a value, right? Whoa. So this is where escape strings really shine. And by the way, this is about the only place they really shine. So this is the only thing I use them for. But my goodness, these are powerful. So let's try mobile. Let's go over here, and I'll show you why they're so powerful in a second. So go ahead and copy and paste your tablet to a new line. Let's change this to say mobile, even though technically tablets are a mobile device. So if we wanted to be more specific, we could say phone. Let's just do that for fun. We'll change this to say 500, right? Because we've learned that those are some really good breakpoints we could use before phones hit them with their screen viewports. And so now we can take this phone, come on down here, and slap it in. So now we've got our tablet and our phone breakpoints. Let's see if it still works. So green's on, there's red, and of course the font size gets bigger. Very good. Okay, you might be going, that seems like it's cool. Okay, like warranted, it's cool. But it really didn't take a lot of my writing away. And I'm like, well, it did. It took all this madness out of the equation, right? But more importantly, it added two major pieces of value to our code. Number one, readability. So now you know exactly what it is in human language, right? It's tablet or phone. Like, makes way more sense. Number two, this thing is super dry, meaning we can update this at a moment's notice now. So for example, marketing team comes in and they say, all right, Josh, we really like what you did here, but we have data suggesting the tablet actually, there's some really crazy tablets out there. We need to kick into tablet at 850 px. Well, in yesterday's code, you would have had to Command F, Control F, find all your breakpoints, hope you didn't mess one up, and change them all to 850, right? It would have been awful. And if you have a real live project, 3,000, 4,000 line CSS, forget about it. Like, you're going to have issues. It's going to take an hour or two to update that stupid simple thing. But now, my friends, with escaped variables, watch this. 850, you got it, done. Every breakpoint got that update because it's an escaped variable. So hopefully your brain's going, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Because now I can update breakpoints instantly across my whole app. So this is really, really cool. Yes, 3,000 to 4,000 lines of CSS is realistic. Very realistic. Just because the sites are massive. Tons of unique styles. And I'll talk to you very shortly here how we can do that, how we can manage that kind of thing without going crazy. Okay, so are there any questions on escape strings? They're super cool. But I want to make, and they look kind of weird, right? Got that weird tilde. But you can see how powerful they are because they allow us to put bigger chunks of content that we could not do in a single variable. Now you might, and my first question, by the way, when I saw this was like, well, when am I going to use this besides media queries? And the answer is very little to not at all. So, but for that one use case, it's worth teaching you because it's so powerful for media queries. The tilde, well, if you look at their syntactical rules, the tilde signifies escaping. But remember, unless 3.5 or newer, so in this case, the current version is 3.7.1. So if you guys downloaded less, you don't need to have those tildes right now. But this is part of their compiler, actually. So this is the thing letting our compiler know, hey, this is a string. And so then it prints out a string. But as you can see in 3.5, we don't even need the strings. So if we come over here, we can actually get rid of the tilde and the strings, and it should work. And it does. So honestly, this seems better. I actually have not seen that until I taught this today, but I really like it. So I think this is really cool. But this allows us to have now inside of parentheses this content. Frank says, would you need to use escaping for something like this? Intro text, droid serif, Helvetica new. No, so that can be housed inside of just a variable for a font stack. So we talked about that yesterday, but that's valid. That's good, Frank. Okay, isn't that awesome, you guys? I wish we could get rid of that stupid media. I wish we could put it inside, but because of interpolation, we can't. So just to remind you what interpolation is, it's bigger than JavaScript. It's a computer science term. It basically allows us to see a symbol. So in this case, we have our @ symbol and media. So all those things together are considered a symbol. And they would replace that symbol with a value or action. So interpolation basically is a placeholder that can be swapped out by a compiler. The problem is @media is a reserved keyword for a media query for the browser to understand. And so the less compiler does not allow for string interpolation because this is reading it as a string, and that's why. If that sounds crazy, don't worry about it. You don't need to know that. You just need to understand that interpolation is something you could Google and push yourself further on if it's confusing. But don't worry about that right now. But I would highly recommend that you do Google interpolation. It's simpler than you think. It just takes time to look at. Okay. Yes, the browser needs @media. Okay, guys, that's escape strings. And you can see how powerful they are. But you have to make sure you have all this other knowledge before that makes sense, right? If I showed this to you on the first day, you'd be like, what the heck is going on? That looks like craziness. But now you understand the craziness has a lot of logic to it. It's coming from something that's a string. Pretty cool. Okay. I know here I don't know, we've reviewed quite a bit. We did some, we reviewed your projects, and then we got into some string interpolation. So let's go a couple more minutes before we take a break, because I think we're doing fine right now. So if we come back here and we look at the next concept, the thing I want to talk about with you is pushing our mix-ins further. So we learned about mix-ins yesterday. We kind of dove into parametric mix-ins a little bit, right? We talked about passing in parameters. But I want to show you guys how we can use parameters and parametric mix-ins to upgrade our code even more. So when I think of mix-ins, I think of them in levels. I think of them in this is just me. This is not less CSS. This is just my mentality. And so when I think of mix-ins, first off, I always want to put a spot for mix-ins separate from variables, right? So this is a really good practice to start commenting your code like this. And then you can say, global styles here. And then we could get into global styles. And then we could get into actual navigation styles, right? So it's good to have these little comments here reminding you of what you're doing, because in a single page of CSS, it can get confusing when you have lots and lots of lines where you are. We're going to address that, so I'm showing you some confusion here. It's going to be solved in a little bit with imports. So if we look at mix-ins, I think of a level 1 mix-in. So we'll call this a level 1. A level 1 to me is a mix-in that has properties in it that we can use over and over. For example, we use center. Remember that yesterday? Display flex, justify content, center, align items, center. Okay. So to me, this is what I consider a level 1. The difficulty is low, the usability is high. It's more general. A level 2 mix-in looks something like 2 mix-ins put together. So if we had a centering and then a custom font or something, or custom size, font sizing. So let's say you have a designer and they're like, okay, I want most of my font size, gosh, typing is so hard today, to be 2rem. And I also want the color to be teal for this specific thing. And you're going, okay, cool. But then you find that the designer really likes to center their stuff and have font size 2rem and have color teal. Well, now you have an opportunity to mix two of them together. So in this case, custom font sizing, and again, you want to put parentheses. Why do we put parentheses? Why do we do that? Because Adam asks a really good question. He says, hey, they aren't necessary, so why are we writing them? Yes, okay, there's the answers. So Chance is saying it cleans up the actual CSS. It doesn't leave a class sitting around. It's consumed by the compiler, right? So I think that's a really good thing for us to understand. And it really helps us understand that these are mix-ins. They're not classes, right? We want to make sure that we don't accidentally write global classes that happen to become mix-ins. So it's really good for us to put these invocation parentheses on it just so it gets consumed by the compiler and is not accidentally used later. Samuel says, why does the less compiler include our comments in our CSS file? Is there any way to configure? So yes, there is a way. You can flag it to say no comments in your compiler, but you can Google that. But it's in the compiler commands. You can go look it up. So level 2 is bringing them together. So then we could say, we could say center font, right? So make a new mix-in. And then we can bring in center, and we can use custom font sizing together. And then we could use this center font on something, and it would mix both of these mix-ins together. So to me, that's what I consider a level 2. All right, meaning complexity went up. It's a little bit more specific use case, but man, it's helpful if you see a pattern inside of your design. Then there's a level 3. Level 3 is basically a parametric mix-in. So let me show you some valuable mix-ins that you might not have seen before. So for example, with cross-browser compatibility, sometimes you have to build websites for older browser users. Maybe you're stuck inside of a banking system or a hospital system, and you're the front-end developer for that. And you have to support IE8, IE9, and different things, and nuances of IE11. Well, that's when web prefixes start to come into play. And unfortunately, they're still around. I wish they weren't. We're getting further and further away from having to use them, but I feel like it would be a disservice if you did not know about web prefixes. So for example, if we tried to say border radius. Border radius, for example, is a newer style that we could put a border radius around something, right? And normally inside of a border radius, like the style itself, I shouldn't write it like this yet. A border radius will look like that. And then we can actually put like, 20px or something inside of a style. The problem is cross-browser compatibility. So, for example, if we go to can I use, and we type in border radius, you can see that all major browsers support it. Well, remember, the problem I presented to you was not all major browsers, right? And so if you look at some of the older browsers, like IE8 can't even use it. It's supported with different usage, has different dates that are relative to when it can be used. And so sometimes to make sure that we can use and make sure that the border renders the same way. So it might be totally supported, like it might be green like this, but border radius will look ever so slightly different across different apps, meaning Chrome, IE, Firefox. They will render that border just ever so slightly different if you don't call it out. And so we have to use web prefixes. This is older. I hope this goes away. I hope I never have to teach this again in the future. But for now, it does exist. And so the way we have to combat that is we have to say -webkit border radius. This, my friends, is called a web prefix. See how it says dash WebKit dash? So this is saying for anything that has a WebKit rendering engine, do the following. Okay, Safari uses WebKit. Moz, what do you guys think Moz is? Mozilla Firefox, that's right. Very good. So we come over here, 20px. And then just the normal border radius right there is great. And then, of course, there's even IE and different ones, but these are the kind of web prefixes I want to show you. So to be a good cross-browser standards-based web developer, knowing about prefixes, if you're supporting older browsers and you want them to look the same, we have to put in 3 different types of border radius, and then whichever browser it is will render the one that it can understand. Isn't that so stupid? Front end is so stupid sometimes. And I'm the biggest champion of it, but it drives me crazy that companies were fighting so much that they actually made border radiuses look different from each other. It's so stupid. So to combat this stupidity, we have to use stupidity with these prefixes. But man, isn't that annoying to have to write that 3 different times, and in some cases 4 different times? So we can use a parametric mix-in. So in this case, I could say border radius, and then I can pop in my radius value, right? So we'll just say radius. Call it whatever you want, but most people say radius. And then we can take our 3 values in here that are repeating their values, so they're not very dry, right? Usually you want border radius at the bottom to be the most specific, just in case these 2 don't render. And now we would just pop this variable in on our 20px's, right? Because it'll be 20px every time, or whatever we tell it to be. So then we would invoke or call this border radius by saying border radius, open and close parentheses, pass in a value. Sorry, no semicolon needed on that inside piece. Okay, so let's try it out. Let's grab our border radius mix-in that we built. Save it so you guys have it. Let me put a border radius. Well, let's see. We'd have to have a border first. We'll just go put a silly border on the H1 for a second, then we'll take it off. But so we do border 1px solid red. So there's our border. And then if we threw a border radius on there, we have to pass in a value. So let's do like 20px like we were doing. And there's that border radius. But then if we look at the compiled code, you can see that we get all 3 of our browser compatibility web prefixes. So there you go. This is a common use of prefixing with our border radiuses. Some of our newer technology, some of the things you'll be using in React, like CSS and JS, they automatically assign these, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. But for pre-processing, we do have to manually worry about it. So if you ever see weird border radiuses on different browsers, now you know how to combat it. Okay, let me answer any questions, then we'll take a break. Yes, Carlos points out MS and O are some as well. So MS is Microsoft and O is Opera. So that would be, we could put those in as well. So if we wanted to be really good and cover all the browsers, we would come down here and say, but look how nice that is. We don't have to think about it. MS and O. O. Save it, and it'll pick up whichever one it has. So thus showing you how much even more powerful these parametric mix-ins are for us to do stupid stuff like this. Stupid but necessary. I shouldn't discount it. Okay. I saw a question while I was teaching. I wanted to come back to it. Someone said, that, okay, Joe says, I'm confused because it seems like mix-ins were working for me without the parentheses. And remember, Joe, that there's a declaration a definition of what we're building. So first off, we have to define whatever the heck we're using, right? So center is a definition. But then to use the definition, you're right, it doesn't need parentheses because there's no parameters. So Joe, I would type this, right? Just like you've been doing. That is valid because there is no parametric. But remember, Joe, this is getting consumed, so that's why I wanted to put the parentheses on it. So that's the difference between what you're seeing and what I'm doing, is that there's a definition that I'm building and there's an actual usage, and those are two different things. Now, when I use my border radius, yes, I'm using the parentheses and passing in values. So hopefully the little light bulb's going off there. All right. Ed says, is the auto prefixer library considered something like a parametric mixin, like how you do it right now? Of course, way more complicated, but in general, same idea. Yes, same idea. They basically would see border radius, and then the compiler would throw in all the prefixes for you. Adam says, what other properties have this issue? There are many other properties, which I don't have time to go over. But you can Google them really quickly. Like just type in common web prefix properties. But for what we're doing, guys, remember, I just told you it would be a disservice if you didn't know this and you went into a job and you saw this and you're like, they never told us about web prefixes. That's why I'm teaching you that. But for us, like in our modern browsers with Chrome, you don't need to do this to get the results you want. But other companies don't have that luxury. I have a friend that works for a bank, which I cannot name, and he said it's awful. It's awful. The standards he has to write just to get things to look normal. But they pay him nicely, so he's still there. Sabrina says, so we just make a bunch of parametric mixins for these kind of things? Yes. And, oh, look, there it is. Gabriel posted a nice thing from CSS Tricks where they give you a bunch of these exact scenarios so that you don't have to think about them. So thank you for posting that, Gabriel. These are some common ones that people will use. Okay, let's see. Yeah. There you go. And by the way, there's these things called gists on GitHub. And basically, they're these tiny little code pieces of static information. And you can look up web prefixes. So you can go in here and you can look at all these different things for all these different gists. It'll give you like, we could even do like gists for less. And we can come in here and we can look at different comparisons. It's pretty cool. So anyway, you're a Google away from tons more information. And yes, drop shadows are still a headache. Okay, guys, let's take a break. I've thrown a ton of knowledge at you. We went, because of the review, I kept it a little bit lighter. Let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we'll keep going down this route. 5 minutes. Okay, come on back from break. Let me get this pointed at the right page again. Okay. Just remember, everything I'm showing you is inside of this less documentation. So anything that looks confusing, just come on back here, hit the overview button, and you can see all these different things. I think, Corey, you were chatting me. Escaping is right here. Let me just put this in chat for everybody, just in case you were wondering where it was. There you go. Okay. So let's keep going down the mix-in level. So we learned about level 3. And remember, this is just my silly naming. It just helps me compartmentalize different types of mix-ins. This isn't official less documentation stuff. This is just me trying to help you grasp mix-ins and their different complexities. So in this case, level 4, to me, is when you start mixing and matching variable parametric mix-ins with concepts that already, like properties that already exist. We did this yesterday, right? But we're going to take a little bit further today. So today, let's make something that if we applied the class to it, no matter what, it would turn it into a button. And that'd be kind of fun. So we'll make a button creator. So if you want to follow along with me, go ahead. Let me save this so we're all caught up together. Let me get rid of these silly border radius styles on this digital agency H1. Okay, so let's see if we can make all these A tags look like buttons. So one of the first things that I would do is I would make the styles first without a parametric mix-in. So first things first, get the dang thing to work. Then refactor it into a mix-in. If you try to build mix-ins from scratch and you don't know what you want, it can be a nightmare. So let's first off try to figure out what a button could look like. So we'll go back into our navigation. We can see we have an A tag inside of our nav, right? And so here's our header. So we know that we just go to the bottom of this H1. And now we've got our nav. And within our nav, we've got our A tag. I always like to put a space between the parent and child relationship just to give me that buffer mentally, because white space doesn't matter. And you can minify all your code at the end of the day anyway, with a little flag when you compile. But for us, let's start building an A tag that looks like a button. So we can use box model to do this, right? So let's first off, let's just give it a background. And we'll make the background gray. And we'll give it a border of like 1px, solid black, so we can see the outline. So far, so ugly, right? But we're getting there. So right now, our text is blue. We don't want it to be blue. We would probably want our text to be white to contrast against the gray background. Now, at this point, we could use a width and a height, but it might be smart to use padding, because then no matter which how big the text is, the padding will work. So for example, if I say padding 20px, let's see what happens. So you can see that the padding goes off of the text instead of a uniform size. This is usually where a designer will tell you what to do, right? They'll say, no, 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 I want all my buttons to always be a certain width. If that's the case, use width. If the designer is saying, I just want 20 pixels difference on the edge of, each line, so there's 20 pixels here, 20 pixels here, use padding. Also notice that when you use padding, that the clickable area maintains, because it's between the border, right? So this padding is really important for us. Now, if we used our box sizing border box, though, which we should be using, let's see what happens. So we'll go under our mix-ins, go to our global styles, and we'll put in box sizing border box. Okay, so notice that we put in 20 pixels padding And because we put it around our A tags and we don't have a width set, it allows us to do that. So this is legit. But the second we put a width on it, boom, the padding would go in. So just remember that. Okay, so with our padding, right now, let's say we wanted to look more button-like, and let's say we wanted some breathing room around this navigation. So let's put some breathing room around it. We'll do some margin 20px so our navigation doesn't have everything jumping into it. Obviously, we shouldn't be on this tiny little scale over here. And it'd probably be wise to separate the logo from the navigation so this doesn't look totally awful. So we'll do display flex, and then we'll say justify content, space between. So now it gives us our navigation system difference, right? Still, maybe 20 pixels is too much. We could do 10, so everything fits nicely inside there. That works fine. So now we could do border radius. Now remember, we've got our mix-in, so we can invoke our mix-in, and we can throw in some border radius here and get some cross-browser. So there's our mix-in. Let's just do subtle is always better, guys, just so you know. So even 5px is a nice little subtle button. Okay, and then we probably don't want to have text underline or text decoration. None. So we don't have that underline. Okay, so these buttons are still kind of derpy looking, but they get the job done, right? The cool thing is we've got this awesome set of styles that we built. The not so cool thing is it only is on our A tag. So what if we wanted to make our services a button? Well, we could take all this code, copy and paste it, go down to our section of main content. So we can make a main content is a new section of content. And inside of here, we could find our H2, and then we could probably pop our styles in there, and we've got our button, right? That sucks. We just copied and pasted our styles twice, right? So this is a really good opportunity for a mix-in. And so what we can do now is we can say, okay, let's get these things up into a mix-in so that I don't have to think about this every time I write it. So in this case, the mix-in's so far away that I'm going to write it just right here. Actually, we'll just write it right here so we can see it really easily. So we'll just say custom button. And we'll start writing our code. So at this point, what I like to do whenever I'm writing a custom mix-in is I pop in everything I want first. So I want all this stuff. And then I kill it all inside of my A tag, and I just invoke the custom button. Does it still work? Yes, it does. So step one, our mix-in's working. At this point, if you knew that these were going to be the same things no matter what, you're done. Like your mix-in's done, easy. But we know that we want to have some customized, like we want to customize our buttons in certain ways. Maybe we want to have a different background color or a different color. Maybe we want to have a different padding. So we can start passing these values in. So in this case, let's do background. Well, I'm going to say at, because remember it's just a variable, and I could say BG for background, or I could say background. So if BG makes a lot of sense, which it does in this case, we can use BG. So then we got to reference this variable down here and actually swap it in so it says background now. And then if we want background to work, we have to pass in a value that is gray. But if we change it to red, look at that. Now our mix-in's working with our parametric values, right? So that's pretty cool. So then I could use this custom button down here on my H2 that I wanted to turn into a button. And I could say red here, and it goes red here, but maintains its gray up here. Pretty cool. This is all review from yesterday, but now we're thinking about it in a different way. We're thinking about it in a creation way, like a reusable way. So the border, we don't want to mess around with border, but we could if we wanted to. We could come in here and say border thickness and like put one value there. but in this case, we don't need to mess around with it. But let's say we wanted to change the color, right? So we can come in here and we could say color, color, and then of course, notice that we've got an error. Definition was found for custom button. No matching definition was found. And so we have to be careful because in this case, it's looking for color. So we've got to pass it in and say, okay, we're going to pass in white. And then over here, we could pass in black. So notice that if we define a parametric mix-in with a parameter, it's going to yell at us if the parameter doesn't exist when we call the style. So be careful about that. Let me see if there's any questions so far. Joe says, how would you style the buttons so they're all the same size, regardless of length of text inside? That was something I couldn't figure out. So Joe, you would set the width. So that's how you would do it. So for example, I would say width, and no matter what, I want all my buttons to be 100 px wide, like that. Then all my buttons will always be 100 px wide. Or I can set in something and say, height 30 px as well. And then we'll start cutting off our buttons. And we could say, make sure that you display inline block or block, depending on what we do. Because if they're not a flex item, they're going to do their own thing, right? So if we want to force everything to look the same, that's how you do it. But as you can see, in this case, it looks kind of cool. It works. But over here, it's not so great. Can you pass in null? No. No, don't worry about it, Joe. It's not obvious. That's a really good question. I think that's a great question. Can you pass in null? No. So if you pass in null, it'll actually break the CSS. It'll remove the style and not the right way. So avoid using that there. Okay. But the reason I want flexible buttons with not hard-coded width and height is because I want to use the padding and the content as my rule for my buttons, so they're much more flexible. That's why I'm doing that. But hopefully that answers your questions. Michael says, custom button, BG, size, style, color. Is that what we would do to manipulate the border? You could do that. You could pop that in. So let's try this out. Let's just look at the next one. So we could say like border size, and then we could pass in a border size reference to our 1px section right there. And then we could pass in, 10px, and then we could pass in 5px. And so you can see it, we could pass in one individual value that could then be referenced. So if you wanted total control, that's how you could do it. But I'd be careful. Like sometimes you want everything just to be the same. Like you always want your buttons to have a 1-pixel border. If you don't, of course, you can do what I just showed you. But if you do, at least you know how to do it now. So you'd recommend using a mix-in for anything that you could possibly want to change in the future and then combine them when needed. I recommend a mix-in anytime you're repeating yourself. So if you see yourself repeating a concept or a style over and over, you can go, oh, that might be a good opportunity for a mix-in. I don't start my projects with just a bunch of parametric mix-ins. I start my projects and I think, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern. I need to start introducing a mix-in. But in this case, if I got a design file from a designer and they said, okay, I've got these buttons and they've got 15 buttons that look the same, my mind immediately goes, that's a mix-in. And yes, we can divide the default values. I can't talk right now. So remember how to do that. You look at the documentation. I want you guys to look at the documentation more than you think you can get answers from me, right? I want you to think documentation. Now, of course, while I'm doing a live demo, it's fine. But you don't have me during the afternoon, right? So make sure that you learn to go to the documentation for these answers. So Samuel says, can we define default values? The answer is, look at the documentation. Let's look at the documentation together and try to find this. So we're looking at mix-ins, right? And notice that there's not anything about defined values here. So we hit this learn more about mix-ins link. Scroll down, trying to find it. Nope. I look at the submenu, parametric mix-ins. Look at this. Okay, there's nothing defined, nothing defined. Aha. Parametric mix-ins can also have default values for their parameters. Radius 5px. I just want to show you how to think, right? I want to show you how to fish. Because otherwise, if I'm just like, here's a fish, you'll never figure it out. So you need to be able to do this on your own. Just a little tip there. Documentation is key. And by the way, I've had to learn that myself. When I was a new developer, I had an extremely awesome senior developer. I would come to him all the time and be like, please, how do I do this? Please, how do I do this? And for the first like 15 times, he did everything for me. And then I would study his code. I would learn what he did. But then whenever something got hard, I went right back to the source because that's where I got the easy money, right? And one day he smacked me and was like, Josh, what the freak, dude? You're going to be a junior developer the rest of your life if you don't learn how to do this on your own. And it was like, oh, like it got me like super sad. It's like, you're right. I'm so sad. And so here's my backhand, all of you now. You guys got to read that documentation. You can't rely on me. I'm not going to be there. But the documentation will be there. And so just think about that. Anyway, as a side note, I wish somebody had said that to me way earlier in my career. So I'm saying it to you now. Read that documentation. Okay. So there's our custom button. We've kind of got it working. But notice how we've got this big old nasty width, right? But we've got some A tags that are inline, right? So man, we've got a block level element and we've got an inline element. Can you guys think of anything that would make both of them look good? Can you guys think of anything that would make both of these buttons look decent? So Ryan suggests a parameter for display, and that's not a bad suggestion. Looking for something else you guys have done on Tuesday. Something with constraints. What CSS property provides constraints? Yes, Chance, max width. So in this case, we could use max width to say at least don't go over 100 px. And then that'll at least constrain us in some way with still giving us flexibility. So this is one way that we could accomplish for both inline and block elements. Pretty cool. So remember, all these CSS things I'm giving you, they don't just apply in one spot. They can be used anywhere. They're just CSS properties. So max width is not used just for responsive design. Okay, so we've got our color. So one thing I like to do is I like to put anything with a parameter towards the bottom so it's easier for me to see. So I'll do color because ultimately if you don't have repeat properties, it does not matter where you put things. So now we're starting to get somewhere. We're starting to have these buttons that we can customize the background from and the color. And we could probably do something else fun like font size or font family or something, right? But you get the idea. So this, my friends, is how we can use, this is what I consider a level 4. So if we go back up to our mix-ins up here. This is level 4. So you've got the combination of properties and parameters to give you a brand new mix-in. And notice that I'm also mixing in another mix-in, right? I'm using this border radius. So yo dog, I heard you like mix-ins. So I put a mix-in in your mix-in. You heard? Okay. So in this case, digital agency, we've got our buttons. We can do this anywhere. We can put this mix in, whether it's stupid or not. We could do it anywhere we want. So we could put it on our container and make our container a button, which would be so stupid. But we could do it, right? So these mix-ins are freaking powerful and almost too powerful, so be careful where you put them. Yeah, fit my mix-in. Okay, so that's mix-ins to the nth degree. Also, wait, there's more. Inside of this mix-in, we can actually use our parent selector to give us even more. So like right here, our ampersand, you guys remember what that is? It's our parent selector. We can use colon, and we can use hover. And now check this out. We can change our background color. So watch this. We could say background, and we could swap out so that we can get a contrast effect like this. So we just swap the colors on hover. Isn't that cool? And it doesn't matter what color you choose, it'll always work because they're going to contrast against each other. I think that's pretty cool. So now you've got a really cool, robust custom button mix-in that allows you to turn anything into a really cool button that you totally control. And yes, Adam says, can we use mix-ins with media queries? And the answer is yes, you can. You can put media queries. But usually you want to keep media queries on the element that you're messing with and not on the mix-in, because you just never know what you want to do. So you don't want to have like too much depth. This is just enough depth. You want to make sure that your element still has a lot of controls for your developer not getting confused by things. The next developer, I should say. So guys, look at this. We have one line of code on our A tag now. Isn't that cool? I think that's so cool. There's our one line and just a couple parameters, and we get all this goodness out of that. Hopefully you're just satisfied. This is a very satisfying experience for me. Makes me very happy to write it one time and use it 400 times. Okay. At this point, I really want to see what you guys can come up with on your own with a button. So I want you to take this code. I don't want you to make some buttons and manipulate the custom mix-in that we built to be your own. So I want you to add or delete or introduce new properties on your own, and I want to see some of your buttons. So let's take I think for 5 minutes, since I'm giving you so much, you should be able to, in 5 minutes, come up with a new button on your own and showcase it. So take this code, fork it, and I want you to make your own custom button that we can look at together. So we'll do that for 5 minutes. 5-minute timer. Ready? Oh, never mind. It didn't work. 5-minute timer. Okay, it's running. Make your own custom button, which we will showcase in 5 minutes in Thread. If you get done early, go ahead and take a little break, but we'll take another break after this shortly. All right, time is up. Let's take a look. I'm going to make a thread. Say button thread. Go ahead here inside of this thread. Pop in some of your forked pens so we can look at your buttons. Awesome. Okay, Alexander. Let's check this out. Awesome. So you put a contact us button down here as proof that you made your own button. Put in different, got a max width 100, board radius 5px. Awesome. Then down here, there we go. Perfect. Oh, can't share my screen. Sorry. Forgot I'm on that timer. My bad. There we go. So you guys can see the button I was getting all excited about. So thank you for showing that. Let's see, Chad, what you got? So inside of our, oh man, we got some crazy epilepsy problems, but clearly doing something fun. So inside of here, we got center, custom font, on hover, position. Let's say so on hover, position fixed, bottom right. Yeah, that's crazy. You can see in the bottom right. So that's crazy right there. My goodness. But fun. That's what we wanted to do. Okay, Hargobind. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. It's a really cool name. Oh, look at that. Look at that cool border. See the dotted border? Very cool. Like that a lot. See, Ryan Walker. Oh, little CSS transition on there. Very cool. Very smooth. I like that. Sean. Boom. I like that hover. Contrast is ridiculous here, but I get what you're doing. Very cool. Let's see here. Jasmine. Don't press the button. Oh my gosh. I have to press the button. Nothing happened. Oh, something happened if I go off of it. Oh, it's because I was already on it. Okay, I see. Very cool. Lol. Let's see, Katie. Little footballs. I like it. Very cool. Okay, guys. Hopefully you get the concept going on here. That is, you can totally customize your experience. All right, let's take a 5-minute break for you. I do not assume that these challenges are breaks. I think it's the opposite. So let's take a 5-minute breather. When we come back, we will finish strong with our media query or our import statements. And it's going to be great. 5-minute break. Okay, come on back to our final portion here. Finish strong. Last concepts, pre-processing 2. All right, so this last concept is one of the most helpful and also kind of confusing concepts that you'll see inside of pre-processing. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. So mix-ins were cool. They are cool, and they're used sparingly. Like, I'm not using mix-ins until I see repeating code, right? So if I see something centered a lot, or if I'm using display flex a lot, I'm tired of writing it over and over, and I want to use like a custom mix-in, it's repeatable code. So in projects that I'm giving you that are not massive, right? It's one-page websites usually. It's hard to see the value, but I couldn't overwhelm you and say build 17 pages, in one day. I can't do that. It's impossible. So you do have to use your imagination sometimes to understand. But I also want to show you stuff in the real world. So let me show you how this works. So yesterday, remember how I showed you that project that I was building? Let's see, that's not what I wanted. I wanted GitHub, or I wanted Bitbucket. I want to show you how this all works together. So let's see, where are you? It's loading. There you are. So inside of this dashboard that we built, if you look at the source files, you can see there's a less folder, right? So this is our new concept. I told you we'd get to it today, and here we are. So I want to show you this conceptually first inside of our little code, how we can think about this, and then we'll jump into that, and then we'll jump back. So up here we've got our variables, our mix-ins. We've got mix-ins that are ending all the way. So this is like 51 lines of consumable code. Like none of this code will show up, right? So it's kind of obnoxious that we have to deal with it at the top of the page, and we have to keep scrolling up. It's the same problem we just experienced with the media queries, right? So we've got a new problem now where we're getting just a lot of stuff, but it's good stuff. It's reusable stuff. Then we come down here and look at this. We've got a chunk of global styles that specificity is very general, right? These are styles that we want to apply to multiple pages, not just one page. Then we've got a navigations chunk here that only applies to our navigation piece up here, albeit it's kind of a derpy navigation. We can fix that real quick by changing a font size and not being so crazy with our media queries. So I guess that defeats the purpose of 1 rem though, 20px. And then we have our navigation. And of course, we could fix a lot of that just by saying display flex, and it'll all line up nicely. Of course, I want to show you something really quickly. You can still use properties on the thing. So let's say that we wanted to have margin on this, but it wouldn't be applicable to all buttons. You can go ahead and put margin in here. Let's just do 5px. And the buttons will still respect it because it's just a selector. So don't get lost in the weeds here. It's just CSS. So we can use all of our CSS properties under our buttons. Remember, it's as if this stuff just got injected on top of it. And then we just put margin down there. So just don't get lost in the weeds there. It's still just CSS. Okay? Our H2 is probably not a good idea for a button, so we'll take that off. But now that we know our buttons look like, we have a good idea. Okay. So in this scenario, we've got these different chunks of text. And even down here, we've got, main content. It's a different chunk. Well, these chunks of styles can be really confusing and hard to read over the span of a project. And so what we can do is we can actually abstract these styles out into individual files and control them in those individual files. So think about that for a second. We can abstract these chunks of logic, these chunks of CSS, I should say. And we can actually say, you know what? I want all my variables and mixins to be in the same file. And I can use all these different things. Well, how do we bring them back together? Well, that's what imports are. So if we look at this at the bottom of our overview here, we have importing. So syntactically, it's the simplest thing you're going to see. At symbol, import. By the way, it's similar to at media, and then it uses the at symbol. And then we can actually import a file that's named like library.less. Notice that we don't have to type in .less if we don't want to, because it automatically assumes you're using less because you're using the compiler. All right. So these imports allow us to import files in separately. You're going, why would I do that? Well, let me show you. So inside of this real project that was just completed, if we go back to our CSS, so we go to source, we look at our index.css. Let's see how many lines of code we're working with. Okay, this was a very small project, and we're at 603 lines of code. So that's a lot of lines of code, right? Even if it's a small project. And so to organize all this crazy code would be a nightmare if I wrote it in one giant file and I had to keep it organized the whole time. Can you see how crazy that would be? It's crazy. All this code, not exaggerating. This is real code. So what we can do is we can use a less folder to house all of our less files and bring them into one file as like, you know, the traffic controller, air traffic control, if you will. So in this case, I have an index.less file that you've been working on, right? So we learned about the index.less file yesterday. But now we're going to evolve, like we always do, into a better way. So the better way is to abstract all of those chunks of meaning into a specificity that we want to control. So for example, I can put my reset.less in its own file at the top of the page. I can put the variables.less in its own file at the top of the page. This is a real project. This isn't just pseudocode. I've got a global.less file controlling all of the general styles. And then we've got components. So in this case, we built a React app, so these were all components. But for you, it would be sections of code, right? So it'd be like the navigation, it'd be the footer, the header, the main content. So these imports allow you to focus 100% on the task at hand and not get lost in the hundreds of lines of code. This is an organizational thing. It's not something that it's because we can't consume all this data really easily. But if we organize bigger things into smaller things, we can be way faster as a developer. So this importing, you will see in different variations in JavaScript. You will see it in React. You will see it all over the place. This concept of taking smaller chunks of code and putting them together into one master file. That is basically React. So this is pseudo React, if you will. These are smaller components into one big app. So with these import statements, we can then import these different styles. So let's go look at our reset.less. Let's go find it. There it is, reset.less. Look at that. It's just my reset, right? Nothing special. It's just the reset. It's just normal CSS. If I don't need to have it nested or anything if I don't want it. But I need to use that reset to make sure I'm cross-browser. So there's my reset. Then you'll notice I had a variables and mixins page. If we look at our variables, looky here. I'm using the escape string pattern that I showed you guys. I'm also using two variables because the site, again, was very simple. So in this case, I've got my font stack and I've got a border color that I was using a lot. Then you go into our mixins. You'll see the mixins is pretty bare bones as well. I've got a center. And there was a subheading that the designer constantly did the same thing on. So I used it over and over. But the fact that I knew where all my mixins are at all times was invaluable. And I did pass this code base on to another developer. And the cool thing is I was able to very quickly in a README file describe how these things should work. So now the next developer does not have to guess where the code is. So that's another value of imports. Also notice that when we got into like global styles, I had my box sizing. I needed to set up a height for the project itself. I set up my rem value. I set up my font family. I made my container, this was a full screen app, by the way. So I had to go with 100% on the full screen. And then we had a dashboard system. So these were all global styles that were impacting everything. But then we got into individual components, like there was an alert bar. And the alert bar didn't do very much, but it was its own component. And so now the alert bar was attached to just the alert bar code. No guessing on where to go. Same thing with all these different components. So like the select container was a little bit bigger, had a little bit more content in it. But notice that 55 lines of code is much more manageable to think about and reason with than 600, right? So imports allow you to sequester your thoughts into little files and work on that one aspect and then go back out to the big picture and go to the next thing and work on it. Okay, so those are the reasons it's really valuable. Let's talk about the cascade. So what's really, really cool about imports is you control your cascade. You always did, right? You always did in your page. The lowest thing on the page is heavier with IDs, classes, and everything in between, right? Like that stuff never goes away. But an equivalent class that's lower is going to be more heavy than the class higher, right? That's just the rules. And so we can say with confidence that everything that we're writing that's unique and specific should be lower than our global styles and should be lower than our resets. And of course, variables and mixins are lazy loaded, but we put them at the top. And then all these styles right here, they don't matter because they're all just going to be components that don't touch each other. Do you guys see the beautiful architecture that is in front of you? This allows you to not have to worry about where your styles are. So what happens is alert bar, dot less, and top bar. Let's go see those in our final file. So if we go look at some CSS, index.css. This is our outputted file, remember. So let's remember alert bar and the next one after it. So there's our alert bar styles. And look at that, there's top bar. So this was the import, alert bar.less. And then this was the import top bar. Notice how that they're like just basically two selectors. Like, isn't that overkill? Not really, because we can use those components anywhere now. Like if they wanted to have multiple top bars on different pages, all they got to do is copy and paste and everything should be housed by itself. It doesn't need anything else to function. So we have modular CSS here. So we can move these modules around. They should be fine. Okay, let me answer any questions you have, and then we'll show you the assignment. This was a single page app, by the way. Okay, so Sean says, would you code one big less file, then chunk it into smaller files, or do the separate files and build along the way? For your assignment today, I've given you the first piece. So I've given you a big file with chunked smaller files, and you've got to build some extra pieces on your own. And you've got to import them in a certain order. Carlos says, so less watcher is only watching the import file, and the changes made to those imported files are watched due to the import? That's right. One thing I want to note, if you're coming from any experience in CSS, your brain would have instantly said, oh my gosh, you're using imports, those are really bad. Imports are really bad in vanilla CSS, meaning no preprocessor. Imports with preprocessors, they bring in files inside of their folder structure. They don't look anywhere else, so they're awesome. Imports in vanilla, meaning anything that doesn't have a .less on it, they try to introduce a new HTTP request, meaning it tries to load in 14 different files individually. That's not what we want. We want one file to rule them all, index.less. And then this one file gets exported to index.css. But it consumes, there's that word again with the compiler, consumes all these keywords and imports all these files in. Okay. Samuel says, what's the reasoning behind calling the first comment testing? I think I was just testing to see if my compiler worked. So good eye, but you can see my brain on display here. I was just making sure that my compiler was working. So that's how, okay, so Chance says, how does the cascade work? So now you should know, Chance. I explained it probably before or after you asked that question. I'm sorry, before. But in this case, the cascade is right before your eyes. Reset is the top of the cascade, variables under it, mix-ins. Remember, these don't matter, though, because they're lazy loaded. This does matter, so global less is next. It's global. Everything gets impacted by it. These individual files are more specific. So that's at the cascade right there. The case says on a multi-page site, is there a way to have conditional imports that only get loaded for some pages? On a multi-web page, you're not really worried about styling is the last thing you're worried about. JavaScript, on the other hand, is something you might need to worry about. In that case, you would just have individual script tags. But styling is so small, it's not something you should be concerned about at this level. You do get worried about that later, though, as websites get massive. Jordan says, so there's not one single .less file in all the code? That's right. So on production is probably what you're saying, Jordan, but when this code is actually running and being used in the browser, it's only using index.css to render the files. Because we learned preprocessors go into compilers that output CSS, right? So at the end of the day, all of your code is getting consumed by that index.less file and outputting this CSS. Chad says, when you're nesting elements in less, do you nest everything in the container class? Remember, what was the thing I told you, Chad, about nesting? Do you remember how many levels deep? That's right. So I keep that same rule for my own code. If I go beyond 4, I introduce a new selector. I try not to use container. Sabrina, what if you need to import a nav file or something but need to customize it for that particular page? So that's fine. You customize your code based with classes in the HTML. So for example, let's say in our HTML, we want to use container for the home page, right? So let's say this is the home page right here. Well, guys, all you got to do is add an extra class. Boom. And now you can use your home to be more specific, right? And then let's say you go to the About page, click, well, now we're on the About page. Well, all you got to do, if we were doing pseudocode with us, like a multi-page website fake thing right here, I'd make a new container on the new page. So imagine this is the new page. And what do? Boom. There you go, guys. CSS is way simpler than you think. So now I can use all the container values that I brought in for my global styles, and I've got a new hook for my specific About page styles. So that's how you do it. Nick says, so the preprocessor will take all these less files and make one CSS. It will if you use the command I gave you, less watch compiler, index.less, index.css, or the index.less file, because it tells it to compile that one file. If you don't run the command I gave you, and you just try to do less watch compiler, it'll try to individually compile each file, and that's not what you want. Because then you get these dumb little tiny CSS files that are awful and they don't work. Okay, sweet. Really good questions. Adam says, so the mixins being lazy loaded mean you could import them at the bottom and they would cascade instead. They would be consumed, Adam. They'd be consumed by the compiler and injected into the code. So there's no cascade when it comes to mixins, remember. Okay, Ed says, do you think you need to be pushing our less files to production? I don't think, but should I? Ironically, it's opposite of what you're saying, Ed. You do want the less files on the repo, and you don't want your CSS file on the repo when working with other people. Because think about your build. You're building your less files every time, right? The CSS is just the final file. So when you're working on a large team, even 4 or 5 people, or even 2 or 3 people, I will always ignore my index.css file because you get merge conflicts like crazy with CSS files. But for what we're doing here, ignore that because we're not doing pull requests with anybody. So don't worry about doing that. You asked, I told you, but that's not what I'm having you do today. And that's that way. Okay, Kyra says, looking at the instructions on the project, it says use the variables.less for styles in the mobile part. Wouldn't they get overwritten? No. So let's talk about the project. So here it is, Preprocessing 2. Here's the link for it if you want to follow along. Basically, I've given you a design file. This one's called FunBus, vacation website, so fun. So in this case, here's the final result of what it should look like. Okay, so in this case, FunBus, this is what it should look like when you're done. But if you look at the code that I provide to you from the get-go, you will find that I've not provided you the top half of the header. It's missing. So see how it says, let's go, adventure, blah, blah, blah. Well, the top half is missing. So I want you to keep using your HTML skills, keep them sharp, and build that top piece in addition to the CSS. But I've given you everything else because I want you to focus more on the CSS than the HTML today. So I'm giving you a little portion just to keep those HTML skills sharp. So to repeat with some annotation, you're going to be building this. Whoa, right there. That doesn't exist in your HTML. You need to build that. But I've given you everything else below it as reference. Okay, so that's part 1. Well, part 1 is getting your part 1 is getting Git, right? Just getting the dang thing in your project. Don't want to overlook that. Task 2 is to set up your preprocessor, which you did yesterday, so this should be old hat. Task 3 is importing the less files in this specific order. So navigate to your index.less file. Notice the file is blank. If we go over here and you look at it, it's blank. And I said follow the order in the README, okay? So you come back to the README, and here's the order that you need to import your files. Variables.less, mixins, reset, global, navigation, footer, home. I did it in this specific reason, because if you don't do it, you'll get strange behavior. Okay. Then we have desktop updates needed. So notice if you review the design file, the navigation, header, and buttons at the bottom of the page are missing. So I took out the buttons because you got to build a button maker. For the navigation, use navigation.less file as your styling. For the main header, use the homepage file for your styling. So you're going to use individual files instead of just writing everything on index.less today. Create a parametric mixin that can create the missing button in the design file. Use mixins.less file to create your mixin. So we've made a bunch of buttons today. You should at least be expert at making buttons now. Then you need to update your mobile. So mobile, make sure you look at the design file and you'll see that some things are missing, like displayed none, that were not on there. So make sure you pay attention to the mobile file and adjust your styles. You have not been provided these styles. You have to go style all this stuff to make it look good. So there you go. There's your project. It should be really challenging and fun. And if you can do this project, which I think all of you can, you will be very well prepared for your sprint challenge because it's almost a mirror of this project. Okay? All right, any questions? Kara says, so homepage less being lower on the cascade doesn't kill styles from variables.less higher. No, but you should be able to answer that question. right? Why? Why about variables.less? Starts with an L. Lazy loading. Very good. Lazy loading, right? It doesn't mess with the cascade. Okay, Carlos says, so remember mobile styling is, how do we do it? Kira, how do we do it? We use nested media queries, right? So we can just put a media query right inside of our style. So for example, if we come over here to our less files, we look at like homepage.less. I've given you a bunch of content, right? So yes, you're going to use that variable. And do you remember the variables? So if we go to variables.less, I've given you variables for colors. But also, remember what we talked about with escaping? So down here, use the variables.less to file to house your styling. So over here, it's going to be right, this thing right here. Remember that? Tablet and phone. So put that inside of your tab in your in your variables.less. That's what I was trying to get across. So I probably need to update that instruction to make it more sensible. Okay. Stretch goals, create animations to go along with all this fun stuff. Introduce a form. We've not talked about forms, but it'd be fun to push yourself and try to introduce a form. Doesn't have to be live, just UI form only. Style the site, look good at all sizes. So I've not given you a tablet, but you could make your own tablet. So those are some stretch goals for today. And of course, you could introduce a whole new page if you wanted to based off the navigation if you're really cruising. Sabrina says, as far as workflow goes, do you recommend spending some time just looking at other people's variables? I recommend spending a lot of time looking at the existing code that I've given you. So I've given you a lot of code, right? So just kind of study what I'm doing. You can see I'm using all the stuff that I've taught you, nothing new. It's just now you've got to add your own stuff to the top of the page, and then you've got to add your own nested media queries and all that good stuff that we've talked about today. And of course, you got to import it all or none of it will work. So first things first, follow the README. It will not lead you astray. Okay. We went over 10 minutes because of 10 minutes of really good questions, so I'm not sad about that. You're free to go if you feel good. Any other questions I can answer before we're done about the assignment or expectations? Okay, guys. Again, this is basically what your sprint challenge is going to look like. I'm going to have you build the top half of another page, and it's going to be responsive and all that stuff. So take today's assignment very seriously, knowing that it's basically a mirror for tomorrow. Of course, it'll be different design, different challenges, but it'll be very similar. Okay, guys, have a good week or weekend. I thought it was sprint challenge. Have a good afternoon, and then we will get into our sprint challenge tomorrow morning. I'm not going to be doing like a guided video I'm just going to give you the README, and away you go, because you're ready for that kind of stuff. All right, have fun. Importing super cool. Use your escape variables for mobile and make those really cool custom mixins. It's going to be super cool. See you guys.